Country people cannot do without the soil. We have a small garden at home, and even though my parents are in the city now, they still think about planting something there. But it's not about planting flowers for decoration like in Europe. They plant things like celery and garlic, stuff that can be eaten. I've even heard that some people used to plant corn and other grains at home. Even though we're in the 21st century now, in the past, every family relied on farming for survival. So the Chinese are inseparable from the soil. Fei Xiaotong mentions that even if the Chinese ended up in a place like Siberia, they would still find a way to get seeds and cultivate the land despite the harsh environment. And even in a lush grassland where it's best suited only for pasture land, the Chinese would still be tempted to clear a plot of land to grow vegetables. This again shows that the Chinese are really inseparable from the soil. Another example Fei Xiaotong gives is when he studied in the UK, his grandmother gave him some soil from her stove, telling him that if he had trouble getting accustomed to his new home in England, he could mix it with water and drink it. This symbolizes the idea of home soil, a way to maintain a connection to one's homeland. We also talk about returning to one's roots and never leaving the homeland. Older Chinese people often say, "I'm already half in the grave," meaning that as life progresses, we all eventually return to the soil. So, in the agricultural society of the 1940s and 1950s, a significant feature of Chinese life was the desire to stay in one's own land and home. Fei Xiaotong says that the use of the word soil to describe rural life is quite fitting. Although it might sound a bit harsh, it's not meant to be negative. Next, let's talk about why Chinese farmers traditionally live grouped together in villages. When a small village grew larger, it would become a bigger village, and villages would gather together. Why did they live this way? One reason is the small-scale farming method. There weren't big farms or tractors, just 1 acre and 3 splits for living. It wasn't safe to live too far from each other, so a few families would come together to form a small village for mutual security and support. And to make water management easier, that's why Chinese people prefer to live in clustered villages. Another fundamental difference between Chinese and Western societies lies in their social structures. As Fei Xiaotong pointed out, social structures can generally be divided into 2 types: organic solidarity and mechanical solidarity. What's organic solidarity? It's like how a family grows slowly over time in a place, expanding into new families, and gradually developing into a community. This is an example of organic solidarity. It's a natural and spontaneous growth. In such a setting, society tends to develop into what we call Gemeinschaft. In a Gemeinschaft follows old customs and rules. When there's a problem, people turn to elders for guidance. Confucius talked about learning and practicing because you study new problems and refine your understanding through practice. The reason why learning and practicing are valued is that in traditional life, new problems weren't as frequent. Most life was about repetition. If there was an elder like Confucius in the village, you just ask them for advice. So, organic solidarity makes it easier for a society to become ritualistic. But look at America. How did American society form? It was created when a bunch of people came together with a common goal, which is an example of what we call mechanical solidarity. Mechanical solidarity tends to lead to a legal, rational society. Why is that? When so many people gather in one place, who do you listen to? Nobody's elder can command authority over everyone. Instead, you set up some rules that everyone has to follow. Otherwise, you won't achieve the common goal or solve the problem you came here for. Hence, this kind of mechanical bonding leads to a legal, rational society. In contrast, China has a long history of ancestors, passing down cultural practices from generation to generation, creating unique cultural traditions. We are a typical familiar society. When you read Fei Xiaotong's work in this book, you'll see that it really is about a familiar society. In China, people aren't used to signing contracts or making formal agreements. Think of our Q. He struggled with signing his name or making a mark because he'd never done it before. Instead of formal agreements, Chinese people rely on personal connections. If someone from your family knows someone, it's enough to get things done. In the past, many Chinese people, when doing business with foreign merchants, weren't accustomed to signing contracts. They would simply say, "I promise I'll do it," and that was enough for them. Westerners, on the other hand, required formal documentation. They couldn't just take your word for it. This shows two very different cultural attitudes toward trust. China is a classic familiar society based on personal relationships. The term rural soil doesn't imply a lack of wisdom. Sometimes we might see an old man from the countryside come to the city and struggle with basic tasks like crossing the street, and people might mock him for being clumsy. But Fei Xiaotong points out that he's just not used to city life. He's never seen a car before, so of course he doesn't know how to navigate it. But if you look at the countryside, this same old man might notice ants moving and immediately know it's going to rain or understand seasonal changes and agricultural needs. His knowledge of the 24 solar terms, plants, animals, and predicting weather patterns shows great wisdom. So, soil doesn't equate to a lack of wisdom. It's just that people's environments and experiences differ.